The modest, cobblestone street in Guadalajara shivered under the cold breath of dawn, a frigid whisper winding through the ancient colonial houses, carrying with it the dense scent of damp earth and the faint, lingering trace of burnt firewood, utterly insufficient against the biting chill that gnawed at the skin. It was a dawn steeped in raw, lacerating abandonment, a moment where absolute solitude and profound helplessness solidified into an unbearable reality, leaving behind only the metallic echo of a slamming door that resonated, cruel and utterly definitive, within the heavy silence of the night. The encroaching darkness seemed to swallow the last vestiges of hope, while the distant stars, cold and indifferent, glittered in a vast, uncaring sky, silent witnesses to an injustice just beginning to unfold beneath their icy gaze. The air, thick and oppressive, brought with it a suffocating sensation, as if the city itself held its breath, poised in grim anticipation of the unfolding drama that marked the unexpected, harrowing commencement of a tiny heart's arduous journey. Diego, a boy of merely 6 years, his frail body appearing almost translucent beneath the flickering, weak glow of a distant street lamp, felt the icy trails of frozen tears etch paths down his small face, gleaming brightly, reflecting a profound innocence now irrevocably shattered. Dark circles, deep shadows beneath his wide eyes, were stark testaments to countless nights consumed by anxiety and a pervasive fear, a burden far too heavy for such minuscule shoulders to bear. A quiet, almost imperceptible resilience, often disguised as shyness, had been his fragile armor within an already fractured home. Yet, in this chilling instant, an overwhelming vulnerability enveloped him completely. He stood exposed to the inclemency of the penetrating cold that seeped through his thin pajamas, to the gnawing hunger that clawed at his empty stomach, and to the crushing, all-consuming sensation of being utterly dispensable, a feeling that slowly suffocated him as time itself seemed to halt, suspended in the desolate air. Ricardo, his father, a man in his mid-30s, once an imposing figure, now faded into an image of absolute cruelty, his departure a stark betrayal. In the deceptive light of public scrutiny, he had meticulously crafted the facade of a hard-working, concerned parent, a man of respectability, but within the oppressive intimacy of their shadowed home, his profound selfishness and debilitating neglect were palpably real, steadily corroding the very foundations of their family like a slow-acting poison. The most indelible visual gesture of his cowardly flight was the firm, deliberate grip of his hand upon the cold doorknob, the dry, sharp click of the latch, the final, definitive closing of the door that irrevocably sealed Diego's fate. His elongated shadow, grotesquely distorted by the dying light of an old street lamp, slithered away through the deserted streets, vanishing into the encompassing darkness, propelled by the illusory promise of a new life, unburdened by the complications a son represented, perhaps driven by a hidden debt or the seductive allure of a new, equally selfish love. His father's final chilling words, "Don't follow me, you're in the way," were not merely sounds, they were frigid daggers that plunged deep into Diego's soul, echoing relentlessly within his mind as he futilely struck the unyielding closed door, his small fists, now red and painfully raw, pounding against the cold, impenetrable wood. Each desperate thump was a silent, agonizing scream for help, a searing, desperate plea for a love that had never truly been his, a profound yearning for warmth where only ice had resided. The immediate physical consequence of that intense cold and overwhelming despair manifested as a dry, persistent cough that racked his fragile body, his lips, a pale purple hue from the biting frost, and a subtle thread of crimson blood that welled from his scraped knee as he stumbled and fell onto the frozen cement, a small, stark scarlet stain against the vast gray canvas of indifference. As Diego lay crumpled on the ground, his muffled sobs the only sound breaking the profound quietude of the cold dawn, several neighbors, roused from their slumber by the persistent crying and the jarring slam of the door, observed the desolate scene from the veiled sanctuary of their windows. Their motionless shadows, cast starkly upon thin curtains, were unwitting accomplices in a collective impotence, a heavy, suffocating silence that hung in the frigid air, as cold and dense as the nascent fog beginning to gather around the boy. Not a single soul dared to intervene, to shatter the invisible barrier of fear or the chilling apathy that held them captive, thus leaving little Diego utterly abandoned to the mercies of his own cruel fate. Time itself seemed to stretch, each passing second an unbearable eternity for the small boy, while the fragile tendrils of hope withered within his tiny heart, almost extinguishing completely under the weight of such profound neglect. But then, amidst the crushing inertia and the pervasive despair that had settled like a shroud upon the desolate street, a new shadow, notably taller and imbued with an undeniable determination, began to stir, slowly cutting through the thick, suffocating mantle of communal indifference. An elderly man, his steps firm and resolute, his countenance serious yet etched with a quiet strength, emerged from the lingering darkness, his figure projecting an aura of unwavering authority and, more profoundly, of deep, unshakable compassion. His eyes, initially fixed upon the cold, unforgiving ground, now slowly lifted, sweeping over the rows of silent, watching windows, before finally settling with an intense, deliberate focus upon the small, shivering figure huddled miserably on the ground. The very air around them seemed to vibrate with his arrival, as if the street itself had patiently awaited this precise, pivotal moment, and in that instant, a faint spark of hope, almost imperceptible, yet undeniably present, ignited within Diego's small, wounded chest, a nascent premonition that perhaps, just perhaps, this cruel abandonment was not, after all, his desolate end. The modest cobblestone street in Guadalajara shivered under the cold breath of dawn, a frigid whisper winding through the ancient colonial houses, carrying with it the dense scent of damp earth, and the faint, lingering trace of burnt firewood, utterly insufficient against the biting chill that gnawed at the skin. It was a dawn steeped in raw, lacerating abandonment, a moment where absolute solitude and profound helplessness solidified into an unbearable reality, leaving behind only the metallic echo of a slamming door that resonated, cruel and utterly definitive, within the heavy silence of the night. The encroaching darkness seemed to swallow the last vestiges of hope, while the distant stars, cold and indifferent, glittered in a vast, uncaring sky, silent witnesses to an injustice just beginning to unfold beneath their icy gaze. The air, thick and oppressive, brought with it a suffocating sensation, as if the city itself held its breath, poised in grim anticipation of the unfolding drama that marked the unexpected, harrowing commencement of a tiny heart's arduous journey, a journey now marked by an unbearable, crushing weight of despair. Diego, a boy of merely 6 years, his frail body appearing almost translucent beneath the flickering, weak glow of a distant street lamp, felt the icy trails of frozen tears etch paths down his small face, gleaming brightly, reflecting a profound innocence now irrevocably shattered. Dark circles, deep shadows beneath his wide eyes, were stark testaments to countless nights consumed by anxiety and a pervasive fear, a burden far too heavy for such minuscule shoulders to bear. His father's final chilling words, "Don't follow me, you're in the way," were not merely sounds. They were frigid daggers that plunged deep into Diego's soul, echoing relentlessly within his mind as he futilely struck the unyielding closed door, his small fists, now red and painfully raw, pounding against the cold, impenetrable wood, each desperate thump a silent, agonizing scream for help, a searing, desperate plea for a love that had never truly been his, a profound yearning. The immediate physical consequence of that intense cold and overwhelming despair manifested as a dry, persistent cough that racked his fragile body. his lips a pale purple hue from the biting frost, and a subtle thread of crimson blood that welled from his scraped knee as he stumbled and fell onto the frozen cement, a small, stark, scarlet stain against the vast gray canvas of indifference. A quiet, almost imperceptible resilience, often disguised as shyness, had been his fragile armor within an already fractured home, yet in this chilling instant, an overwhelming vulnerability enveloped him completely. He lay exposed to the inclemency of the penetrating cold that seeped through his thin pajamas, to the gnawing hunger that clawed at his empty stomach, and to the crushing, all-consuming sensation of being utterly dispensable, a feeling that slowly suffocated him as time itself seemed to halt, suspended in the desolate air, each breath a struggle against the encroaching numbness. As Diego lay crumpled on the ground, his muffled sobs the only sound breaking the profound quietude of the cold dawn, several neighbors, roused from their slumber by the persistent crying and the jarring slam of the door, observed the desolate scene from the veiled sanctuary of their windows. Their motionless shadows, cast starkly upon thin curtains, were unwitting accomplices in a collective impotence, a heavy, suffocating silence that hung in the frigid air, as cold and dense as the nascent fog, beginning to gather around the boy. Not a single soul dared to intervene, to shatter the invisible barrier of fear, or the chilling apathy that held them captive, thus leaving little Diego utterly abandoned to the mercies of his own cruel fate. This silent complicity, a betrayal almost as profound as his father's, amplified the child's sense of utter isolation, turning their homes into fortresses of indifference. Time itself seemed to stretch, each passing second an unbearable eternity for the small boy, while the fragile tendrils of hope withered within his tiny heart, almost extinguishing completely under the weight of such profound neglect. The cold, once merely a discomfort, now felt like a living entity, a predatory force, slowly consuming his warmth, his energy, and his will to resist. The smell of damp earth mingled with his own fear, a bitter metallic tang on his tongue as he tasted the icy ground beneath his cheek. The faint light of dawn did not bring solace, but rather a stark, unforgiving illumination of his predicament, painting the details of his despair in shades of gray and blue. He was a small, broken bird fallen from its nest, with no one to offer a wing of comfort. His small body, already ravaged by the night's ordeal and the gnawing hunger, began to shiver with an intensity that transcended mere cold, a deep, convulsive tremor that threatened to shake the very life from his fragile frame. His vision blurred, the distant street lamp's glow fracturing into 1,000 shimmering needles, and the world began to tilt, colors fading into a monotonous gray as the edges of consciousness frayed. A profound weariness, heavier than any physical pain, started to pull him into a dark, silent abyss, a place where the cold could no longer hurt, but from which there might be no return. Just as his eyes fluttered, threatening to close forever, a new sound, distinct from the city's indifferent hum, cut through the fading awareness, a low, guttural growl, too close for comfort, echoing from the shadowed alley nearby. Before the biting chill of the Guadalajara dawn, before the metallic clang of a door sealing his fate, there had been a different cold, a slow, insidious freeze that began to seep into the very foundations of Diego's world with his mother's passing. He barely remembered her face, a soft blur of warmth and gentle laughter, but the scent of her jasmine perfume, faint yet persistent, still clung to the worn fabric of his imagination, a ghost of comfort in the growing desolation. Their small, sun-drenched home, once vibrant with her presence and the aroma of freshly baked tortillas, had gradually transformed into a hushed, shadowed space, each empty corner echoing with a silence that pressed down on his small chest. This was the first profound loss, a quiet, internal abandonment that preceded the public, brutal one, leaving a void that no amount of childish hope could ever truly fill. After his mother's light dimmed, Ricardo's infrequent presence became even more erratic, his temperament shifting like the unpredictable winds of the rainy season, leaving Diego adrift in a sea of unspoken anxieties. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a temporary shelter, devoid of the steady, nurturing rhythm that had anchored his earliest years. He often retreated to a dusty corner, clutching a small, faded drawing of a vibrant butterfly, its colors now muted, a testament to countless hours spent in solitary comfort. This was his mother's favorite creature, a symbol of fleeting beauty she had once pointed out to him in the garden, and now it was his silent confidant, a fragile link to a love that felt increasingly distant, a tangible piece of a shattered past he desperately tried to hold on to amidst the encroaching shadows. Ricardo, even in those fading memories, was a man of stark contradictions, a chameleon cloaked in the guise of a benevolent patriarch for the benefit of prying eyes. Diego vividly recalled an afternoon when a neighbor, Doña Elena, stopped by, her voice laced with concern, as she inquired about his well-being, prompting Ricardo to suddenly don a facade of paternal affection, ruffling Diego's hair with a forced smile. But the moment the door clicked shut behind her, the warmth vanished, replaced by a chilling indifference, a sharp, dismissive glance that cut deeper than any physical blow, a stark reminder of the profound emptiness that truly resided in his father's heart, a private cruelty far more insidious than any public neglect. The move had been abrupt, a jarring upheaval that stripped away the last vestiges of familiarity, transplanting Diego from the only home he had ever known into a smaller, colder dwelling that felt less like a haven and more like a temporary holding cell. This new place, with its perpetually damp walls and the persistent, musty odor of neglect, mirrored the chill that had settled deep within his bones. Ricardo rarely explained anything, his decisions absolute and unquestioned, leaving Diego to navigate the unsettling currents of his new reality alone, clutching his butterfly, drawing like a lifeline. Each night, the silence in the cramped rooms pressed in on him, a heavy blanket of solitude that amplified his growing sense of abandonment, making him feel even more disposable in his father's ever-changing life. Yet amidst the deepening shadows and the pervasive sense of dread, a quiet, almost imperceptible strength flickered within Diego. He clung to small, self-imposed routines, tracing the faded lines of his butterfly, whispering silent goodnights to the memory of his mother, and meticulously arranging the few worn toys he still possessed. These small acts of defiance against the encroaching chaos were his anchors, tiny assertions of control in a world that offered none. This innate resilience, a stubborn refusal to fully succumb to the despair, was a testament to the enduring spark of life within him, a fragile flame that refused to be extinguished entirely, even as the world around him grew progressively colder and more indifferent, threatening to snuff out his tender hope. Even as Don Rafael's gentle hand offered a nascent warmth, a fragile promise of safety, the echoes of his father's final, cruel words still clawed at Diego's mind, a venomous whisper that poisoned the budding hope. The world, for him, remained a labyrinth of shadows and unseen dangers, a place where even kindness felt precarious and fleeting. The elderly doctor's compassion was a beacon, yes, but it could not erase the deep-seated fear that had become an intrinsic part of his being, nor could it shield him from the insidious reach of Ricardo's calculated indifference. As Don Rafael began to gently guide him towards a new, uncertain path, Diego couldn't shake the chilling premonition that this was merely the beginning of another, far more complex struggle, one from which escape still felt utterly impossible, a trap waiting to spring. The metallic clang of the closing door, previously an echo of departure, now reverberated with the force of a final, irreversible expulsion, a brutal act that physically thrust Diego from the last semblance of warmth into the biting, indifferent street. Ricardo, his face a mask of cold resolve under the anemic glow of the street lamp, had not merely left. He had actively pushed his small son aside, a fleeting, almost imperceptible shove that nevertheless sent the boy sprawling onto the unforgiving cobblestones. This was not just abandonment, it was a deliberate casting out, an act steeped in a chilling finality, a visceral rejection that tore through the fabric of Diego's fragile world with the force of a hurricane. The raw injustice of it all settled like a lead weight in the pit of his tiny stomach, leaving him breathless and utterly disoriented, a tiny figure against the vast, uncaring canvas of the approaching dawn. The fall was immediate and jarring, the rough, icy stones scraping against his thin pajamas, the impact sending a jolt of pain through his small, vulnerable body. His knees, already raw from countless tumbles in less cruel circumstances, now bore fresh, crimson streaks against the pale skin, tiny rivers of blood welling up to meet the frigid air. A dry, rasping cough, a familiar companion through nights of anxiety, intensified, racking his fragile frame until his lungs burned with the effort. His lips, a faint purple from the relentless cold, trembled uncontrollably, and a deep, convulsive shiver took hold, a tremor that spoke not just of physical cold, but of a profound, soul-deep despair that threatened to consume him whole. He lay there, a crumpled heap of innocence, the tangible consequences of his father's cruelty etched upon his very being, testament to a neglect that cut deeper than any wound. A choked sob escaped Diego's throat, a sound barely audible above the whisper of the wind, yet it was a desperate plea for a warmth that had never truly been his, a searing, agonizing cry for the love he craved. He pushed himself up, his small, trembling hands reaching out instinctively towards the closed door, his voice hoarse and cracked, attempting to form words of "Papa" and "please," but only a raw, guttural keen escaped. Each desperate thump of his tiny, bruised fists against the unyielding wood was a silent, agonizing scream for help, reverberating not in the empty street, but within the hollow chambers of his own heart. Where but where? The silence that answered him was not merely the absence of sound, but an active, suffocating presence, a colossal indifference that pressed down on him, stealing his breath and crushing the last vestiges of his childish hope, leaving him isolated in a world suddenly devoid of solace. From the other side of that cold, impenetrable door, a voice, sharp and devoid of any warmth, pierced the fragile quietude, cutting through Diego's desperate pleas like a shard of ice. Ricardo's words, now laced with an even colder contempt than before, echoed with a chilling finality. "Don't follow me. You're in the way. Don't you understand? You're a burden." Each syllable was a frigid dagger, plunging deeper into Diego's already wounded soul, reinforcing the crushing sensation of being utterly dispensable, an unwanted obstacle in his father's selfish pursuit of a new, unencumbered life. The metallic taste of bitter tears mingled with the dry, dusty air in his mouth, the weight of those cruel words settling upon him like a suffocating shroud, extinguishing any lingering flicker of doubt that this abandonment was anything less than absolute, premeditated, and utterly heartless. As Diego lay huddled, his muffled sobs now the only sound breaking the profound quietude of the cold dawn, several neighbors, roused from their slumber by the jarring slam of the door and the boy's persistent cries, observed the desolate scene from the veiled sanctuary of their windows. Their motionless shadows, cast starkly upon thin curtains, were unwitting accomplices in a collective impotence, a heavy, suffocating silence that hung in the frigid air, as cold and dense as the nascent fog beginning to gather around the boy. Not a single soul dared to intervene, to shatter the invisible barrier of fear or the chilling apathy that held them captive, thus leaving little Diego utterly abandoned to the mercies of his own cruel fate. This silent complicity, a betrayal almost as profound as his father's, amplified the child's sense of utter isolation, turning their homes into fortresses of indifference against his desperate plight. Time itself seemed to stretch, each passing second an unbearable eternity for the small boy, while the fragile tendrils of hope withered within his tiny heart, almost extinguishing completely under the weight of such profound neglect. The biting cold, once merely a discomfort, now felt like a living entity, a predatory force slowly consuming his warmth, his energy, and his will to resist. Just as the edges of consciousness began to fray, and the world threatened to fade into a monotonous gray, a new shadow, notably taller and imbued with an undeniable determination, began to stir. It cut slowly through the thick, suffocating mantle of communal indifference, a figure emerging from the lingering darkness, his steps firm and resolute, his countenance serious yet etched with a quiet strength, projecting an aura of unwavering authority and, more profoundly, of deep, unshakable compassion, the first sign of a world that might yet hold kindness. Don Rafael, a pediatrician whose wisdom and gentle touch had graced countless families in Guadalajara for decades, now moved with a purpose that belied his age, his steps firm against the cold cobblestones. His heart, usually a haven of quiet empathy, throbbed with a contained fury as his gaze swept over the desolate scene, a raw injustice unfolding under the indifferent gaze of the nascent dawn. His own son, a bright flame extinguished too soon in a tragic accident years ago, was a phantom limb, a constant ache beneath his ribs, and seeing little Diego, a crumpled heap of innocence, reawakened that deep paternal grief, transforming it into a formidable resolve. The biting chill of the morning air seemed to sharpen his focus, pulling him into the moment with an intensity that burned away the usual serenity from his gray eyes, replacing it with an unshakable determination to protect this vulnerable child. He felt the heavy weight of the city's collective apathy, a silent complicity he refused to join. He knelt slowly, the cold radiating from the unforgiving asphalt seeping into his knees, yet he barely registered the discomfort, his entire being focused on the shivering boy. His extended hand, calloused from years of comforting the sick and distressed, moved with a tenderness that was almost palpable, reaching towards Diego, whose wide, tear-filled eyes slowly lifted, meeting a depth of compassion he had never known. This wasn't merely a child in distress, it was a ghost of his own past, a poignant echo of the son he had lost, a chance to pour out the boundless love he had been denied, a profound yearning to mend a broken heart, and, in doing so, perhaps even soothe the lingering wounds within his own soul. The touch, warm and firm against Diego's icy skin, sent a jolt, a fragile spark of security amidst the relentless chaos that had engulfed the child. "From now on, little one, you come with me. You are no longer alone," Don Rafael whispered, his voice a low, steady balm against the biting wind, his warm breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. It was more than a promise. It was a sacred oath, sealed beneath the indifferent gaze of the distant stars, echoing with an authority that resonated deep within Diego's tiny, wounded chest. The boy, who moments before had been shrinking into himself, felt an unexpected warmth bloom within him, a radiant heat that spread beyond the physical touch of Raphael's hand, reaching the very core of his soul, a healing salve for invisible wounds. The crushing fear that had been his constant companion began to recede, giving way to a fragile thread of hope, a nascent trust he, in his profound innocence, had never imagined he might feel again, as if a safe harbor had finally appeared amidst a raging storm. Just as Don Rafael began to gently lift Diego, the door, which had been a symbol of impenetrable abandonment, creaked open slightly. Ricardo, his face a mask of annoyance rather than remorse, peered out, his eyes narrowing as they fixed upon the elderly doctor cradling his son. "What is the meaning of this?" "Get away from him," he snapped, his voice sharp and utterly devoid of the calculated charm he displayed in public, revealing the raw, ugly truth of his inner self. The sudden appearance, a stark contrast to his earlier cowardly flight, was a deliberate act of defiance, a desperate attempt to reassert control over a narrative he believed was his to dictate, utterly oblivious to the profound moral outrage his actions had already ignited within the quiet street. His presence, though fleeting, was a challenge, a chilling declaration that he would not easily relinquish his convenient facade. Don Rafael, without releasing Diego from his protective embrace, turned his gaze, now sharp and unyielding, directly upon Ricardo. "The meaning," he stated, his voice low but cutting through the dawn's silence with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, "is that this child is no longer a burden for you to discard. He is a human being, and he deserves more than your cold indifference." The doctor's words were not a plea, but an accusation, delivered with the full weight of his moral authority and the simmering grief for his own lost son. Ricardo recoiled slightly, caught off guard by the unexpected steel in the old man's voice, his practiced bravado faltering for a fleeting instant. This was not the meek neighbor he expected. This was a force, a guardian rising from the quiet shadows of the community, challenging his carefully constructed world of self-serving lies. A flicker of something akin to fear, brief but undeniable, crossed Ricardo's face, quickly replaced by a sneer. "This is none of your business, old man. Get out of my way!" He spat, but his words lacked conviction, his gaze darting nervously towards the shadowed windows where silent witnesses still lurked. He quickly slammed the door shut once more, the sound echoing with less finality and more desperation this time. A clear retreat, rather than a decisive exit. Don Rafael held Diego closer, feeling the boy's small body tremble against his own, a silent testament to the raw impact of his father's cruelty. The door, now firmly closed, felt less like an end, and more like a temporary barrier, for Don Rafael knew this brief, chilling encounter was merely the first volley in a battle far from over, a confrontation that would inevitably escalate, pulling them all deeper into its unforgiving currents. Ricardo, having retreated behind the safety of his closed door, was not one to accept defeat or public scrutiny lightly, especially when his carefully constructed facade was at stake. He quickly moved to orchestrate his counterattack, his mind already spinning a web of deceit, painting himself as the aggrieved party, a concerned father whose difficult child had simply run away, fabricating a narrative of his own victimhood. His first call was to a notoriously unscrupulous lawyer, a man known for his ability to twist truth and exploit legal loopholes, his reputation preceding him in the darker corners of Guadalajara's legal circles. Ricardo's voice, now smooth and feigning distress, relayed a distorted version of events, emphasizing Diego's supposed, quote, unruliness and his own sacrifices, meticulously crafting a story designed to shield him from any accountability and to cast Don Rafael as an interfering busybody, an old man meddling where he didn't belong, thus setting the stage for a bitter legal battle. The lawyer, a man named Salazar, with sharp, calculating eyes and an air of detached superiority, wasted no time. He immediately filed a motion, a barrage of legal documents designed to overwhelm Don Rafael and the nascent community support, painting the doctor's actions as an illegal abduction and demanding Diego's immediate return to his rightful, if absentee, parent. The cold, impersonal machinery of the child protection system began to whir, its gears grinding slowly, threatening to transform Diego's plight into a bureaucratic nightmare of endless paperwork and procedural delays. This initial legal volley was a chilling testament to Ricardo's cunning, a clear demonstration of his willingness to weaponize the law against his own child, turning the very system meant to protect the vulnerable into an instrument of his continued cruelty, deepening the sense of injustice that permeated the air around them. Don Rafael, though momentarily taken aback by the swiftness of Ricardo's legal maneuver, refused to be intimidated. His resolve, forged in the fires of personal loss, only hardened. He knew he couldn't fight this battle alone, and the community, stirred by Diego's story, began to rally. Dona Elena, her initial fear now replaced by a fierce protective instinct, came forward, her testimony a quiet but powerful indictment of Ricardo's long-standing neglect. She recounted numerous instances of Diego left alone, of Ricardo's dismissive attitude, her words painting a vivid picture of a child consistently abandoned. Other neighbors, emboldened by her courage, also offered their stories, small fragments of truth that, when pieced together, began to form an undeniable mosaic of paternal dereliction, providing Don Rafael with the crucial human evidence he needed to counter Ricardo's fabricated narrative, transforming Whispers into a collective roar of indignation. Armed with these powerful testimonies, Don Rafael further fortified his position with a meticulously detailed medical report. Every scraped knee, every shiver of hypothermia, every sign of malnourishment on Diego's small body was meticulously documented, transforming his suffering into irrefutable scientific evidence. The report, written with the precision of a seasoned physician and the compassion of a grieving father, became a stark, clinical portrait of Ricardo's cruelty, a silent scream for justice that no lawyer's rhetoric could easily dismiss. To Diego, whose small world was still reeling, Don Rafael made a solemn, unwavering promise. "You are safe here, little one," he whispered, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. "No one will ever make you feel unwanted again. I will protect you no matter what it takes." This vow, delivered with profound conviction, was a beacon of hope, a tangible shield against the lingering shadows of abandonment, a commitment that resonated deep within the boy's wounded heart, offering a fragile sense of peace. Despite the growing mountain of evidence and the surging wave of public support, the legal process remained agonizingly slow, a bureaucratic labyrinth designed to wear down even the most determined advocates. Preliminary hearings were repeatedly postponed, documents inexplicably misplaced, and the sheer volume of legal jargon threatened to suffocate the simple truth of Diego's plight. The constant threat of Diego being placed in a government-run shelter, an impersonal institution where his fragile emotional wounds might never truly heal, loomed large, a dark cloud hanging over their fragile sanctuary. This agonizing delay, a torturous limbo, tested Don Rafael's patience and commitment, transforming the fight for justice into a grueling marathon, where every legal maneuver by Ricardo's lawyers seemed designed to prolong Diego's suffering, stretching the very fabric of their hope to its breaking point. Just as the bureaucratic delays threatened to consume their resolve, a serendipitous discovery offered a glimmer of a breakthrough, a vital piece of the puzzle that could shatter Ricardo's carefully constructed narrative of innocence. An old wallet, forgotten in a box of discarded items Ricardo had hastily donated before his grand departure, was found by a meticulous neighbor, a woman with an uncanny eye for detail who recognized its significance. Inside, nestled among faded receipts and forgotten photographs, was a crumpled note, a hastily scribbled draft of a letter to Ricardo's new partner. It spoke of the need to shed all past complications and a significant gambling debt, explicitly stating his intention to, quote, "start fresh, unburdened." This was the smoking gun, the irrefutable evidence of his selfish, premeditated abandonment, a secret that threatened to blow his carefully crafted life apart. But the question remained, would this crucial piece of paper reach the right hands before Ricardo could silence it forever, or perhaps silence them? Within Don Rafael's modest home, a sanctuary of quiet warmth and the comforting scent of old books and brewing coffee, Diego found a solace he hadn't known existed. The doctor, with hands surprisingly gentle for their age, helped him shed the thin, damp pajamas, replacing them with soft, dry clothes that felt like a tender embrace against his chilled skin. That first warm bath was more than a cleansing. It was a ritual of healing, washing away not just the grime of the street, but the persistent cold and the suffocating fear that had seeped deep into his small bones. Later, at the kitchen table, a steaming mug of rich hot chocolate warmed his trembling hands, and a plate piled high with simple, nourishing food began to quell the gnawing hunger, filling him with a sensation of comfort so profound it brought a fresh wave of tears, not of sorrow, but of an overwhelming, unfamiliar relief. As Don Rafael meticulously tended to the scrapes on Diego's knee, applying a soothing antiseptic, the boy, his voice still a fragile whisper, began to recount fragments of his harrowing ordeal. Each halting word painted a stark picture of neglect, of nights spent alone, and of the crushing weight of his father's indifference. Though a fragile sense of safety now enveloped him, the fear still flickered in his wide, shadowed eyes, a deep-seated wound that would take more than warm food and a soft bed to heal. Don Rafael listened with an infinite patience, his heart aching with each revelation, yet his gaze held no judgment, only an unwavering resolve. He placed a small, worn teddy bear, a treasured relic from his own son's childhood, into Diego's hands, a silent promise of companionship and protection against the lingering shadows, a tangible symbol of hope in a world that had offered him so little. Meanwhile, in his opulent new apartment, Ricardo's carefully constructed world began to feel the tremors of impending exposure. He had received a terse, official notice of a preliminary hearing, a stark reminder that Don Rafael was not merely a meddling old man, but a formidable opponent, backed by a growing wave of public indignation. His initial annoyance quickly escalated into a cold fury, his mind racing to concoct a more sophisticated counterattack. He couldn't afford to lose face, or worse, his newfound freedom and the comfort of his lavish lifestyle. His lawyer, Salazar, assured him that the legal system was a labyrinth, easily manipulated, and together they began to weave a new web of deceit, a more aggressive strategy designed not just to dismiss the charges, but to completely discredit Don Rafael and his allies, transforming the victim into the aggressor, a chilling new chapter in his calculated cruelty. Don Rafael, though weary from the emotional toll of Diego's story and the bureaucratic hurdles, felt a renewed surge of determination. He convened a meeting with his growing circle of allies, the compassionate volunteer lawyer Elena, whose legal expertise was invaluable, Donna Elena, the brave neighbor whose testimony was a pillar of truth, and even a sympathetic, seasoned police officer, Inspector Morales, who had quietly been gathering intelligence on Ricardo's suspicious activities. The crumpled note, discovered in Ricardo's discarded wallet, became their secret weapon, its contents a clear, irrefutable motive for his premeditated abandonment. They meticulously planned their next move, each person committed to ensuring that Ricardo would finally face the full, unyielding force of justice, transforming their collective whispers into a unified, undeniable roar for the vulnerable child. The small, faded teddy bear, now clutched tightly in Diego's tiny hands, became his constant companion, a silent anchor in a world that had violently shifted beneath his feet. Its worn fur absorbed his silent tears, its button eyes reflecting the fragile hope that slowly began to blossom within his wounded heart, a tangible reminder that he was no longer utterly alone. It was a simple object, yet held immense power, a symbol of the compassion that had enveloped him, a stark contrast to the cold indifference of his past. As you listen to Diego's story, where are you watching from? Does this kind of unwavering community spirit, rising to protect the most vulnerable, resonate in your corner of the world, sparking a similar hope for justice? Ricardo, having finalized his latest, most insidious plan with Salazar, initiated the next phase of his attack with a chilling, almost predatory calm. The legal papers, now prepared with a calculated precision, were not merely a defense, they were a counteroffensive, alleging defamation and child endangerment against Don Rafael, twisting the narrative with a venomous intent. But his ambition didn't stop there. Under the cloak of night, a shadowy figure, hired through an intermediary, began to discreetly observe Don Rafael's home, his movements precise and unsettling. The goal was not just to discredit, but to reclaim Diego by any means necessary, to silence the living proof of his depravity, a plan so audacious and cruel that it threatened to plunge the fragile, newfound peace of Don Rafael's home into an abyss of terrifying uncertainty. As the silent watcher reported the daily routines, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. The judge, his gaze unwavering, attempted to convey a sense of calm, but the sheer magnitude of the moment hung heavy in the air, a silent, suffocating presence that pressed down on everyone in the hushed courtroom. Diego, a tiny figure barely visible behind the imposing witness stand, clutched his worn teddy bear, its familiar softness, a fragile anchor in the swirling maelstrom of fear and uncertainty. Ricardo, across the room, maintained his smug, almost bored expression, a theatrical performance of indifference that grated on the nerves of every compassionate soul present. The low hum of the air conditioning seemed amplified, each breath in the room held captive by the tension, waiting for the small voice to break the silence, to finally unravel the intricate web of deceit that had entangled a child's life in its cruel threads, a truth poised to explode. With a deep, shaky breath that barely stirred the air, Diego finally spoke, his voice a whisper that somehow carried through the profound silence, amplified by the raw honesty of his pain. He recounted the metallic echo of the slamming door, the biting cold that seeped into his bones, and the gnawing hunger that had become his constant companion. His small fingers tightened on the teddy bear as he recalled his father's words. "Don't follow me, you're in the way." The frigid daggers that had pierced his soul, and the futile, desperate pounding of his tiny fists against the unyielding wood. Each halting word, each trembling syllable, was a brushstroke painting a vivid, heartbreaking picture of abandonment, a testament to a cruelty so profound it brought a collective gasp from the public gallery, a visceral reaction that resonated deeply. Ricardo's lawyer, Salazar, immediately attempted to interject, to dismiss Diego's testimony as the fanciful imaginings of a traumatized child, but Don Rafael, his own eyes brimming with a controlled fury, rose with an unwavering resolve. He held up the crumpled note, found in Ricardo's discarded wallet, a small, innocuous piece of paper that now felt like a ticking time bomb. The judge, sensing the pivotal moment, silenced Salazar with a stern glance, demanding that Don Rafael present the evidence. The air crackled with anticipation, a palpable shift in the courtroom's atmosphere, as if all present instinctively understood that the carefully constructed facade of Ricardo's calculated lies was finally about to crumble, revealing the ugly truth beneath the polished veneer. Don Rafael's voice, clear and resonant, filled the courtroom as he read the damning words penned by Ricardo himself: the need to shed all past complications, a significant gambling debt, and the chilling intention to start fresh, unburdened. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, a wave of shock and outrage washing over the room. Ricardo's smug expression instantly shattered, replaced by a mask of raw panic, his face draining of color as the weight of his premeditated cruelty became undeniably clear, laid bare for all to see. Dona Elena, tears streaming down her face, nodded vehemently, her quiet affirmation echoing the sentiment of every person who had witnessed Ricardo's long-standing neglect, finally unmasking him as the heartless manipulator he truly was, his carefully crafted world of lies imploding. Ricardo erupted, a guttural roar of denial and rage, attempting to deflect the blame, to accuse Don Rafael of manipulation, to brand Diego as an unruly child, but his words were hollow, devoid of their usual persuasive power. The judge, his gavel striking the wood with a sharp, decisive crack, silenced him, his face etched with a grave disapproval that spoke volumes. Inspector Morales, the seasoned police officer who had been quietly gathering intelligence, stepped forward, his presence a clear signal that the law was no longer just observing. Diego, witnessing his father's moral collapse, his desperate, pathetic denials, finally allowed the tears to fall freely, not just tears of sorrow, but of a profound, overwhelming relief, a release from the crushing burden of his father's relentless cruelty, a moment of profound, painful clarity. The judge, his voice now imbued with the full weight of his authority, condemned Ricardo's actions as a heinous act of premeditated abandonment and profound cruelty, a betrayal that would not go unpunished. He ordered Ricardo immediately taken into custody, citing the overwhelming evidence of neglect, the child's powerful testimony, and the damning written confession that laid bare his selfish motivations. As the bailiffs approached Ricardo, who was now a trembling, broken man, stripped of his carefully constructed arrogance, the courtroom erupted in a chorus of murmurs and a palpable sense of vindication. Don Rafael held Diego close, the boy's small body still trembling, as the judge prepared to deliver the final, life-altering decision that would shape Diego's future, a verdict that promised justice, but left the precise path forward shrouded in a tense, uncertain silence. The judge's voice, now resonating with the full weight of the law and a profound moral authority, declared Ricardo unfit, stripped of all parental rights, his calculated cruelty and premeditated abandonment unequivocally condemned by the court. A collective sigh of relief, deep and shuddering, swept through the courtroom, a wave of vindication washing over the community that had rallied for Diego. Ricardo, his face a mask of shattered arrogance and dawning despair, was swiftly taken into custody, the metallic clink of handcuffs a stark, definitive punctuation mark to his reign of selfishness. For Diego, still clutching his worn teddy bear, the judge's words were not just legal pronouncements. They were the unraveling of a suffocating nightmare, a release from an invisible cage, allowing him to finally breathe deeply, the crushing weight of his father's indifference lifting from his tiny shoulders, replaced by a nascent, unfamiliar lightness that promised a future free from fear and neglect. Back within the sanctuary of Don Rafael's home, the quiet warmth enveloped Diego completely, a stark contrast to the biting cold of the street and the chilling indifference of his past. That night, after a nourishing meal and a gentle, soothing bath, Diego finally succumbed to a sleep so profound, so utterly peaceful, it was as if years of fear and anxiety were being washed away in the quiet darkness. Don Rafael watched him from the doorway, the soft glow of a nightlight casting a tender shadow over the boy's relaxed face, free from the haunted shadows that had once clung to his delicate features. The rhythmic rise and fall of Diego's chest was a melody of healing, a testament to the powerful balm of safety and unconditional care, a scene of profound domestic peace that spoke volumes of the transformation unfolding within those protective walls, promising a dawn free from the specter of abandonment. Don Rafael knelt beside the sleeping child, his heart swelling with a bittersweet mixture of sorrow for what Diego had endured and an overwhelming, fierce protectiveness. He gently brushed a stray lock of hair from Diego's forehead, a silent gesture of unwavering commitment. "No one would ever make him feel unwanted again, little one," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, the words a sacred echo of the promise he had made, now solidified into an unbreakable reality. "You are safe here, truly safe. This is your home now." The air in the room, once thick with the ghosts of past hurts, now vibrated with a palpable sense of security, a haven meticulously crafted from compassion and an unyielding will to mend a broken spirit, ensuring that the metallic clang of a slamming door would never again define Diego's fragile existence, but rather the soft click of a latch securing his peace. The worn teddy bear, once a silent confidant in the depths of Diego's despair, now lay gently beside him, its button eyes reflecting the soft glow of the nightlight, no longer clutched in desperate fear but as a cherished companion in a newfound peace. Later, Don Rafael helped Diego carefully place the bear on a shelf. Alongside a new drawing, the boy had meticulously crafted a vibrant butterfly, its wings bursting with colors, soaring freely against a sun-drenched sky, a stark contrast to the faded, muted butterfly of his past. The doctor then placed a small, polished brass key into Diego's palm, the key to their home, a tangible symbol of belonging, a silent declaration that this sanctuary was permanent, a place where he could finally unfurl his own wings, shedding the cocoons of fear and growing into the radiant future that now awaited him, filled with warmth and unwavering love. Life, in its gentle, persistent way, began to knit itself anew for Diego within Don Rafael's loving care, each passing day a soft brushstroke on the canvas of his healing heart. Though the scars of his early trauma would undoubtedly remain, subtle whispers of a past he could never fully erase, they would now be overshadowed by the vibrant tapestry of a future woven with kindness, stability, and boundless affection. The memory of Ricardo, a distant fading shadow, served as a stark reminder of the darkness from which he had been pulled, but no longer held dominion over his spirit. This story, Diego's journey from abandonment to belonging is a testament to the power of human compassion. Where in the world are you watching from? Do you believe that even in the darkest moments, the light of human kindness can prevail, igniting hope for those who need it most? As the sun streamed through the window, painting golden stripes across the floor of their quiet home, Diego awoke to the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the soft murmur of Don Rafael preparing breakfast, a symphony of domestic peace that filled the spaces once hollowed by fear. He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached his eyes, illuminating them with a nascent joy, a profound understanding that he was, at last, truly seen, truly loved, and irrevocably safe. His arduous journey, marked by unthinkable cruelty and profound neglect, had culminated not in despair, but in a triumphant embrace of belonging, a testament to the enduring, transformative power of one compassionate soul, choosing to stand against the tide of indifference, forging a future where a little boy could finally blossom, bathed in the warmth of unwavering love and the undeniable promise of a life redeemed.